Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's having a fine evening. I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I should introduce myself. I'm Dr. Warren Doctor. I'm the President and CEO of the East Tennessee Historical Society. And we have a very special show this evening. Show's not the right word, talk. A very special talk this evening. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you all for coming. It's through your interest and your sponsorships and your patronage that we're able to continue to keep our museum exhibitions interesting and fun about the 1982 World's Fair. And if you've not seen that, I'd like to encourage you. And if you're not a member of the East Tennessee Historical Society, I would like to encourage you to join because we do a lot of fun things like this evening. And so I'll be very brief, because tonight you're going to get to hear one of my heroes come speak, and I don't say that lightly. I'm a big fan of Bo's. He's done a lot for East Tennessee and for Knoxville. But you might not know all about him, and that he'll be talking about his book. But I will foreground just a few things. He went to UT. He's also an Air Force veteran. And what's really remarkable, and there are several remarkable things about Bo Roberts, but he was the youngest newspaper editor in the United States, editing 2 papers at once in Gatlinburg and Sevierville. He was the youngest youngest governor cabinet staff appointment in the state, the youngest vice president of UT, and the youngest president and CEO of an international exposition, of course, as you know, the 1982 World's Fair. And so he has accomplished an enormous amount. And it's always humbling and amazing to see someone do that, and with such passion and conviction and love of the region. And so it's very easy to see, because he was the youngest in so many things, why the name of his book is Forever Young. And I'm very happy now to turn over to Bo Roberts, our speaker this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. I appreciate it. And if at any time you can't hear, interrupt with applause. Feel free to do that. And I think this is maybe the 3rd or maybe the 4th occasion in this facility that I get to say one of my favorite things: thank you, Dr. Doctor. Now, I love saying it, because I've never been able to say it in my life. That somebody named Doctor is a doctor. But anyway, and he does a great job. And Lisa and Tim, there's Tim in the back. Lisa's here somewhere. Yeah, there she is. Yeah, Lisa Oakley, Tim Yates, and they're among the staff here. They do a great job. If you haven't seen the show, I'd recommend that you definitely do that. Either, I don't know if it's going to be open tonight, or come back and see it, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to.
It's up until October 9th.
It's up until October 9th. Here. So anyway, thank you for the folks here at the museum. They've done it, and the Historical Center. And also, I've got a lot of family here. I'm not going to introduce all of them, because I was embarrassed to have half my crowd be in the family. But I got some great ones here. My brother, I don't get to see very often, Gary, and his family. And it's great to be here. I do want to mention one member of my family, because I failed to do this in a couple of places in Sevier County where she actually lived for a long time. But my family, part of my family and part of my team, Lee Hendry, who's my wife. And also, if you look at the book, or if you've seen the book, you'll see on the first page, she's also listed as editor, and that is a serious job. She kept me straight, and I think one of the proudest things when we finally got the book in our hands and was finished was that we were still married. So we accomplished that. She's still with me and still part of the team. Okay, that wasn't me, thank goodness. Also, a lot of friends, and if I start naming friends, they would be the other half of the group here. And how much I appreciate all of the friends that were both casual friends, friends that I worked with, friends that we worked together, and I worked for in many cases, in some cases, with Tom here. And very quickly on the, just because when we talked about it and when he put out his material, the fact that it is the East Tennessee Historical Center, and I have a lot of East Tennessee roots. Wasn't born here. My father is from Anderson, Roane County, but and when I was born, there weren't many jobs here, so he was in Akron, Ohio, and that's where I was born. And but when I was 6, he moved back to Tennessee, and I moved to Tennessee with a Yankee accent and got beat up a lot when we got down here. Went to Oak Ridge there for through the end of the war, and then to his hometown of Harriman, where I finished high school, and then went to the Air Force, different places around the country, California and other places. Came back and to go to UT. I went in the Air Force partially to get the GI Bill so that I could kind of breeze through. I mean, you get GI Bill, just, you went in luxury. And if anybody did it, they know I'm kidding. I think it was $133 a month was to live on, pay tuition, and do all that stuff. But in those days, you could get by with that. We did. And anyway, so back to Knoxville for UT, and then before I got out of school, the last 2 quarters I was in school, I was in journalism. I got approached and went to work at Sevier County for a gentleman who's a great friend and Bill Postlewaite and a great mentor. And he needed some help up there, and so I went up thinking could he help him. He thought I could. Anyway, he ended up as Norm was saying. I didn't know this, but when I graduated, then I was elevated to editor 6 months later, and we were contacted by a national publication, and or I was, and that I was the youngest editor in the country. I had no clue, and I didn't set out to do that. But anyway, had a wonderful time there. I thought growing up in a small town I would never want to work in a small town, go back. But 60 miles in between Sevier County and Roane County, it could have been 600 miles. I mean, we were all East Tennesseans, but there's a lot of differences. And I learned so much in my first adulthood, if you would say full-time job, from the tremendous people who were up there, and I mentioned that. I was up there 4 years, and one of the highlights or lowlights of the time that won't get into now in detail, but I mentioned quite often, quite in detail in the book, is I think I may be the only Sevier County in history, and probably I doubt if anybody else in the room has this distinction of having a cross burned by the KKK in my front yard. Anybody else had that happen? Well, now Sam, my son Sam just came in. He was there. He was about 6 years old, I think, when it happened. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But so that's one of my claims to fame. And I later was contacted by a reporter when I was in Atlanta after I left Sevier County, and he had tracked me down because he was doing a feature story on the KKK, and he had a picture of the national publication called the Fiery Cross, and my picture was on the front page, and they called me a communist and all this kind of stuff, and I guess in their eyes was. I tried to live my life without prejudice, but I have to say I've got one very strong prejudice and very strong hate, and that's for the KKK. They're not on the top of my list. But anyway, back to East Tennessee, and then I left for a year to go to Atlanta, found out kind of what I didn't want to do, back to UT, and then went to Nashville, interviewed with the governor, and he was running for re-election, Governor Ellington, and he said I happened to be the youngest cabinet member at that time who had ever been selected to serve in Nashville, and then served those 4 years, then went back to UT, and I got elevated to vice president, and again, some reporter at the Daily Beacon came up and said, he interviewed and researched and said I was the youngest vice president ever come to UT. And then anyway, stayed there for a while. Sorry, I keep and had a great time, and then went and did some private business and came back. And somebody says, "What were you doing before you went in to become president of the World's Fair?" And I said, "Well, I think I kiddingly used to say I think I just got a discharge from a mental institution to take that job." And anyway, they talked to me about setting up an office because the fair started, had a nonprofit corporation, and they were dealing with the mayor's office, Chamber of Commerce, TVA, UT, Oak Ridge National Lab, and all these different ones were involved in the application with the Department of Commerce, and they said, hold on, we need one place to contact, one person, somebody. And so that's why they came and talked to me about it, and I was intrigued by it. I'd served on a committee, one of the site selection committees, and was intrigued by the process, but I had no idea ever thinking about being involved. And so I committed originally to 6 weeks of consulting to set up the office, get it started, get the file set up and everything, like get a point of communication. And that 6 weeks turned into 7 years. And so that's what later on when I made the mental institution reference. So East Tennessee in my blood, orange in my blood. But at the same time, I'm not originally from here, but I consider myself pretty much an East Tennessean. And when we started this and got into it, part of the book, one of my chapters is you're doing a what, where. I mean, you go out and trap somebody says, what are you doing? Well, he said, you're doing a what? Where? You know, are you doing a World's Fair or Expo in Knoxville, Tennessee? Yep, we sure are. And we had a long way to go, a lot to do. And so we started, and I wanted, there's some of you heard me mention, there are thousands of stories that were involved, millions of people, over 11.1 million people came to this fair. I will summarize part of it is by saying what we didn't know we couldn't do, we did, and it was a tremendous success. How do you call it success? Well, let's take we're a special category World's Fair. You're on a theme, and you have to build the buildings that they come in. So it's internationally a special category. Hemisphere, San Antonio, Seattle World's Fair, Spokane World's Fair, and then after us, the New Orleans World's Fair are in that same realm. We had more countries participating, and by 2.5 million more attendance at our 11.1 million than any of those were others. San Antonio, Seattle, Spokane, New Orleans, by far. And the closest one in attendance was Seattle. It had about 9 million. So can I say it's a success? I think if you just take facts, and those are facts that I like to choose, you know. And so I'm saying that's the case. And another story that I will tell that I think is really important, particularly in today, is it probably was the most activist bipartisan effort about anywhere in the world that may have been attempted, anywhere in this country had been attempted. Why did I say that? Now, I don't mean just bipartisan cooperation. I'm talking about bipartisan activists. We had to have our Senior Senator Howard Baker, Republican, our Junior Senator young Jim Sasser, our Democrat, our 5 Democrat congressmen, well, those were the days, our 4 Republican congressmen, all working together in unison to push this. We started under a Republican president, Gerald Ford, when the application started. Then we went to Jimmy Carter, and then we went to Ronald Reagan. I was up at 2 inaugurations. One with the second one, Ronald Reagan, we had a parade, had a float in the parade. So, and then we had, and the mayor of Knoxville is an interesting position. It's a nonpartisan. I mean, it's nonpartisan, I guess, Randy, that'd be correct. And in other words, you don't run as a Republican or Democrat, as you all know. But sometimes people kind of know what you are. And if you're generally, you know, if I don't know, I'm not going to take a vote in this room, but if I'm in East Tennessee, I expect at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of the crowd to hold up their hand when the R word comes out. But at that time when it started, the original idea came from a young man, or a gentleman who was head of the downtown Knoxville Association, Stuart Evans, who'd gone to Spokane, seen what it had done there, what it had done for their city and their downtown. And he came back with this idea. Well, Stuart, those of you maybe some of you here who remember him, great guy, retired colonel, and he was, but he came back and had this idea. And Stuart was the kind of guy that had ideas all the time. He'd try and do anything to revitalize downtown Knoxville because it was shrinking. You know, everything was going out west and the suburbs and blah, blah, blah. And some people thought, well, here's another one of those crazy ideas Stewart's got. But somehow he got that current mayor at that time, Kyle Testerman, who was a Republican, no Republican, didn't run as one, but and he was doing a good job. He liked it. He got interested in it, and Kyle made some of the best steps that have ever been made. I'm talking about bipartisan. He went out to the head of the largest bank in East Tennessee, who also happened to be one of the national leaders in raising funds for the Democratic Party, very active in President Carter's campaign, very close to him, and as to chair of this committee. He got his vice chair, one of the top Republican fundraisers in the entire country, in this state for sure, and a fellow that's still with us, Jim Haslam. It was the vice chair. And then they got these other people involved, and you didn't ask who, but both parties were represented. Well, after it got started, it got some committees going. I said I was on one of the on a committee, and people were getting interested and kind of excited about it. And then Kyle had to run for re-election. Everybody thought, well, that's going to be a shoe-in. I had a buddy of mine that wanted to run against him. He came to talk to me about it. I spent 4 hours one hot summer afternoon in a restaurant in downtown Knoxville, trying to tell him all the reasons he shouldn't run. All he got against you is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are both against you. You had the morning paper and the afternoon paper both against you. And I can't name a whole lot of people who are going to be for you. And my friend said, well, I just feel it. I just feel it, and I feel that there's a dissatisfaction there, and I'm going to run. And so Randy Tyree got in the race. Race had to happen. And first go around, Kyle won. But he was 37 votes short of having 50% plus one. And so they had to have a runoff. And my friend won that thing. Randy Tyree elected, and he happened to be a known Democrat. Again, it was a nonpartisan, but the expo or the World's Fair or whatever wasn't really an issue in that campaign. He wasn't running against it. He wasn't running for it. Kyle was, but it was more relationship, I think, Bennett, and working with the working people and so forth. Anyway, for whatever reason, that was the situation, and that probably had a little something to do with them coming and asking me to work for this corporation too, knowing that we were friends. We'd known each other for several years. He had worked as a colleague in Nashville with me at the law enforcement activities down there. So anyway, away we went. So Republican and Democrat, both active, and off we went. And if we don't, if you don't have the mayor of the city that wants to host an event, forget it. I mean, you fold the tent and you go away. I mean, and then secondly, you need to have a governor. The state of your state, in our case, Tennessee, needs to be for this event. And we kind of got by with the current Mayor Blanton at the time. He was a Democrat, and I knew him, but we weren't friends. He didn't like me at all. But we got by because of a mutual friend who was Commissioner of Tourism, and he kind of shielded us for a couple of years there. But then the race was coming up in '78, just a couple of years down there. And guess what? The chairman of our board, a Democrat named Jake Butcher, who had run for governor once before and lost to Blanton, and 7-person race, and he was running, and he got the nomination. And then we had another East Tennessean named Lamar Alexander that got the Republican nomination. And so Jake resigned as board chairman of our nonprofit. Jim Haslam stepped up as chairman. We stayed out of the election, I can guarantee you. But and somehow the World's Fair, the Expo, early on we kind of changed the name back to Expo '82 because World's Fair kind of scared everybody. And once we got approved and down the road and needing to market it, we kind of changed back. It's like, so they say, well, what's the difference? I said, well, it's like calling a football field a gridiron. It's just same thing, just what you call it. But anyway, so we had a Democrat chairman of our board running against and the Republican one, and without Lamar Alexander and him being a part of Jim Haslam, very important to that. But Lamar, we had briefed him on all the things related to the World's Fair, and without him and without the state's support, not just on appropriation of their own for the amphitheater that you all enjoy, we still enjoy, and other things. Without that, we wouldn't have moved forward. Plus, a little thing called malfunction junction that we need to spend almost $1 billion getting corrected before the fair opened. That was kind of a task within 3-4 years to get that done. So anyway, so my point was, and then we had a change of presidents. Carter was very supportive. He had a hard time controlling some of his cabinet members, but he was supportive of us and helped. And then all of a sudden, bang, we had Ronald Reagan, and he had no relationship, really with Tennessee at all, but we had Howard Baker, the minority and majority leader. And so the Republicans, and we didn't miss a beat. I mean, it's just amazing to me as being involved in government and politics to see how these things fit together. But it wasn't nice bipartisanship. It was active bipartisanship. Howard Baker couldn't just say, "Oh, that's okay." He had to go in and support it, and to the point that soon after Reagan was in office, Secretary of State Haig hosted a huge reception at the U.S. Embassy in Washington. From all the countries, invited them in to come in and be a part of this event. So I could go on and give you other stories, but that, I want to give a feel for bipartisanship. And then a part of that also, we had the strength and support of a management committee, a board, but then a management committee that was it the last 6 months or last year, Tom, that we met every week?
3 years.
3 years. Time flies when you have fun. And Tom Sutherland is here. He was the youngest member of that board, by the way. And there are only five of us left, I guess, of the 16. And it was amazing how we had the captains of industry. I mean, we had the head of Alcoa, the head of Oak Ridge National Lab, president of the University of Tennessee, a leading banker in the country, and on. Fulton Silphon presidents, and about any major thing going on in this region was involved in the management of, and these guys were, and sorry, but at that time most of it was guys. I had to, that's the way it was at those days, unfortunately. But they were given time. I mean, their time was extremely valuable. Tom Bell, head of the East Tennessee Natural Gas for all East Tennessee, was the chairman of that management committee. And Tom, we had the use of his helicopter, and we were back and forth to Nashville and doing everything. I mean, it's amazing to watch. And I don't believe, I'm making this part of the bipartisanship because I don't know what to remember. I don't know what party they belong to. I knew some, but, and again, in East Tennessee, I'd take a guess, probably 80% of them were Republicans, but it didn't matter. It wasn't a Republican Baptist, Baptist. I used to be one of those too. A Democrat issue, it was what's best for this community. And we didn't know. I used to kiddingly say sometimes, so what was the secret of management success? I said, well, part of it was ignorance. We didn't know what we couldn't do. Somebody hadn't told us. They tried to tell us what we couldn't do, but we found out a way to do it. So anyway, the bipartisanship, active bipartisanship was so important to making a success. Now I want to see if you all have questions. I'll warn you now. So in a few minutes, if you have any questions, I don't care how mean they are, because if they're really bad, I'm going to ask Randy to answer them, and otherwise I'll do my best. But also international politics interfere. And it's kind of amazing how this kind of goes around and becomes timely. Our biggest, if any of you in real estate, or you're aware of it, when you build a shopping center, you have an anchor tenant. That's your main draw. That's got to bring the people in that gets all the other tenants in, the department stores and other things. And our anchor tenant was going to be all the way along the Soviet Union and Russia and their satellite countries. And they were actually building their exhibit. I know I'd been over there 3 or 4 times, and they were very supportive and going great guns, and we were just and getting these other countries, everything was looking great. And then in early 1980, Russia, or the Soviet Union, decided they were worried about a border, And so they invaded a bordering country, a little place we'd never heard of, called Afghanistan. Kind of familiar to us now, isn't it? And we didn't like them. We and the rest of most of the Western world didn't like them invading Afghanistan. So it happened to be in 1980, Moscow was the host of the Olympics, Summer Olympics that year. And so Carter says, U.S. is not going to participate. Many of the Western countries did not participate. So we boycotted those Olympics, as you may recall. And obviously they turned around, so we're not going to come to your World's Fair. So our anchor tenant is gone. And so what are we going to do? So we pivoted, thought, and turned our focus to a country that never participated in a World's Fair before, called People's Republic of China, that we just barely had relationships with, that President Nixon had started. And very young as a country at that time, as an organized country, very large. Anyway, I won't go into all the detail, but that was our focus, and I was over there 4 times. We had people over there. I mean, we used every chip we could think. I even had a meeting. I don't think I mentioned this in the book. Set up that a friend, a former Nixon appointee as a governor of American Samoa, set up a meeting with John Mitchell, the former Attorney General who had been convicted and just gotten out of prison and was consulting in Washington. And that was kind of a weird meeting, and we didn't do any business with it. But anyway, I'd look for anybody, I'd talk to anybody. So anyway, we got China to commit, and as you know, any of those of you who attended or you had your parents attend, some of you are not old enough to attend the World's Fair. If your parents attended, may have told you that. The China Pavilion was the draw, and the most interesting. We actually talked them into bringing several bricks from actual bricks from the wall. They had just discovered the Bing warriors, full-size terracotta warriors and horses. We got them to bring several of those over. You could never get that done today, but we had a way of convincing them. Anyway, it worked out great. But anyway, international politics. We had local politics, state politics, national politics, international politics. Somehow, we did all that, and we, in fact, we're talking to somebody last night, Lee and I were, and she was talking about all the bad press that President Reagan's, when he got here in his speech on the opening day, apparently was very partisan, and it wasn't anything, didn't attack the fair or anything, but he was a little bit about the fair, and he was calling Democrats. I could care less. All I cared about is the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, was in our town, on our stage, opening the fair. Now, I don't care what he said. He could have called me an SOB, and I'd have kissed him, But anyway, it was a great day, and I think when the last story, I try to just sum it up real briefly, is the people say, well, what was your measure? What was your most enjoyable thing? And it's hard. There was never one thing, because there were thousands of things for all of us. We each had experiences that each of us could share. Good and bad, mostly good, I think. But seeing the joy on the faces of the kids and the adult and the parents and the grandparents coming and experiencing things that they never thought they'd ever get to see. And just being walking across the site, and one of our costumed characters would come up, and the kids would go crazy. I mean, just on and on and on, and watching and seeing them stand in line for an hour and a half to get in the Chinese pavilion, to do all of these things in sometimes 90-degree heat. Most of the times 90-degree heat when we were there. And yes, over 11 million folks that decided to do that. So I think it was the joy, that seeing the joy in the faces of the people, and watching them. I know one little example. The Knoxville Symphony played quite often in the amphitheater, as some of you may recall. And one time early on, the conductor, and I can't remember his name right now, but he's a friend, he complained a little bit about the ambient noise, because if you've been to something in the amphitheater, there are other things going on. If you're there for the fair and in the amphitheater, people are walking around to go on other things. You've got an Energy Express at 10 o'clock. You've got these things going. Other sounds. It's not in a sound-controlled environment. And he kind of complained about that a little bit. And I said, well, look, I understand. It's not going to be perfect. But you're going to have people walking by that of all ages, from all places around here, and from all over the country and all over the world, that may be the only time in their life that they ever hear a live symphonic music. So enjoy it, embrace it, and he did. They did a great job. But anyway, it was that type of thing that you have we called it a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and everything's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you think about it. But that was 184 days, many once-in-a-lifetimes, and it was a pleasure and a real joy to be a part of that. I'm going to stop at this point, and I've gone longer than I meant to, but if anybody has any questions or comments. Okay. We do have several people here who I worked for. Tom Subman, I've already mentioned. Tom was on the management committee, and what a great supporter. People who worked there, Bill Schmidt. Where's Bill? Bill Schmidt, great. I took credit, and I will take credit for saying I wanted to have sports as a part of this World's Fair. There's never been a sports event as a part of it. So I'm a sports nut, so I'm jealous. I mean, I'm selfish. And so that was my declaration. That's about as far deep as I went. But I had the good sense, we had the good sense to hire Bill Schmidt to come in and hit that program up. And when I got back in and researched it, I didn't know half the things we'd done. He put all these things. Take a look. If you get the book, in the back, it's a listing of all the events that occurred throughout the 184 days. And it's just amazing. If I start telling stories about everybody, we'll be here all night. Cookie Krausen, my right hand, left hand, and the one who kicked me in the butt when I needed to be. She was everything. Carol Logan, Carol, Joe Bruner, Cindy Waters. Cindy, great photographer, a longtime friend. She fits in all kinds of sections of my book. My sons, Sam and Mark, who are here, and their wives are here. John Brock. John, come in. Yeah. There he is. Hey, John. Got you. I got you back there. Anyway, are there any other? Well, I know there's Mr. Human here, and there's some others that worked at the fair that I didn't.
Mary Ann Herrick. I worked for George Oldham.
Worked for George, right? Great man. And you were a vendor there, Mr. Human. Anyway. Welcome to all of you. Any questions? I will wind up, and then we'll be available. And if you haven't purchased the book, you're not required to, but you'd be welcome to right up here. And then if you'd like me to sign it, I will. And if you want to pay me more, I won't. Okay. Any questions? All right. We must have answered them all. And
I'd
Jack?
like to say something. If some of the people that worked with you in the fair could come up here immediately, we'll get a couple of group shots before you start signing. Would that be all right, in case people leave?
We have a professional photographer. Actually, he used to be a colleague of mine at the University of Tennessee, Jack Williams, and he's vice presidents together. And if the ones who worked at the fair will come up here as soon as we're over and have a quick, and we'll get a photograph. Bill?
I got a question. I get asked this all the time. I heard it was a fair that lost money. Maybe you can address that.
Incorrect.
That's exactly right.
Barely. Yeah, and I apologize, 'cause it's hard for me to give a short answer because nothing is really that easy. I think we result in our books end up with like a $47.82%. I'm gonna say 82. That sounds good. Profit. Originally, we thought we forecast a surplus, and we would with our attendance, and we made our attendance. But the only area that we really missed on, and today's news and today's time, we can all relate to this. It's hard to remember this. When we closed our loan at Chemical Bank in New York in October of 1979, and that was to get all these 24 banks across the country involved, putting in different levels. It's a whole story to itself how that happened, unusual anyway. Chemical Bank made their projections of the worst case scenario. that the prime rate, because our loan was 2.5 over prime, the worst possible prime rate that would occur before the loan was paid back was 13%. Can you imagine 13% prime rate? Yeah. Well, you know what prime rate got to? 21%. We're paying 23.5% interest at one point on money. So we were getting discounted tickets sold in advance. Every dollar was worth $1.25. I mean, so that cash flow was a real challenge. But so anyway, despite all that, every one of those banks, plus about 2,000, Tom, or 3,000 ambassadors who put up the original money. The original financing for all this stuff that went on for all these years was people came in and became Expo ambassadors, and they signed a note for $1,000, and some of them signed another note, and some of them signed another note, and had it in the banks. All the local banks were holding them, and if we'd have folded at any point, bingo, their money gets called. I mean, you talk about high risk and low guarantee, no guarantee. And so anyway, all of those, none of those had to be paid, had to be called. And every single bank got every single dollar, including the banks that obviously had the problems later, the CNC and United American. So it's a long answer to your question. The answer is we basically broke even by the skin of our teeth. But had we have had a 13% cap on the prime rate, we probably would have had, at that case, about $2 million, but overall we would have had about $5 million to turn back to the community after it's over. Sorry for the long answer.
I think it's important, as I greet people out here, I tell them I work out front, it's the return on the investment with all the infrastructure, bring people downtown, and Knoxville, in my opinion, would never have seen the growth. It took lots of years for that to take off, and had it not been for the investment of the World's Fair and all the infrastructure that went in, and putting Knoxville back on the map, so to speak, we're within 4 hours of most of the population of the eastern United States, and many of them came. And so there was a huge return on investment over time, in my opinion.
Thank you, Tim. I agree. Mr. East Tennessee Republican Jim Henry is with us tonight. Jim, to see you come in. Yes, sir.
I'm a little bit late, but I can probably hear the answer to this question. What was the deal closure on the site? What really sealed the deal on
the site and the location? Very interesting, because as I said, I was on that committee that worked on it, and you think at first when you look at, all right, we want to do this big event. We're going to get average, they're projecting we'll have 11 million, so 60,000 people a day on average are going to come in here for 184 days. You got to park them, you got to get them out and get them in, get them back. So the easiest thing to do is go out in the country, get 400 acres, 100 acres, whatever out there, have your parking, get up and build the buildings, temporary buildings, go set it up, have your fair, have a big party, leave it, and what do you got? You got an empty field with a few stubs of buildings still left out there. So the idea was to, what are you going to answer that, address that question, what are you going to have over? So we looked at and picked what ended up, and I say we because I was part of it, but it wasn't my decision at all. But the community decided we had what I call an ugly armpit between University and Fort Sanders and downtown Nashville. Abandoned railroads, and you didn't want to look down. When you're driving from UT downtown, you wouldn't look down. You wasn't sure what you'd see. And so that was the choice, to take that land that was underutilized or malutilized in a way and turn it back to the community in something that would have benefit later. And so an excellent question, because I think the whole thing when you're looking at doing a major event, what's there afterward? Ours was 6 months, and it was 6 months of party, 6 months of fun. It was kind of hell getting there sometimes, but it was 6 months of fun once we got there. But what's there afterward? And I think, and I have to think that some of what's the growth that's now occurring in the downtown area and everything is now, is the result of that effort and that energy that went into making that happen. Yes, Mr. Brock.
Well, I've stayed in Knoxville to know how much the progress has meant to the city and our development, but I've wondered for years, how much money did our participants make off of being here? What did the China Pavilion gross?
You know, that's, yeah, Tom will know this or not, but he asked how much money did some of our participants make, and I know that we had to, several times had to close for a few hours the restaurant in the Chinese Pavilion, because they were doing so much business that they couldn't keep up with taking their trash out. So we had to just close them down a couple of times and just say, you know, stop until you get it cleaned up and get back. I mean, they weren't breaking the law, but they could have been. And I'll give you one example of one vendor that you probably some of you may still go to, Buddy's Barbecue. And Buddy's Smothers? Yeah. Was one of the first ones early on. When you talk about risky, he came on, signed on, put up some money. I don't remember exactly how much, probably $25,000 or more, just to be the official barbecue of the World's Fair. When it opened, anyway, who knows it's going to open? And so, and I know that the staff got really know Buddy's Barbecue, because any event we put on between then and the opening of the fair, you're going to come and have Buddy's Barbecue, and we'd get them as our caterer and pay him back. But Buddy was, I mean, he took a high risk at this, and he just believed in it and believed in the people that were involved in it. At the end of the fair, Buddy's had 3 or 4 spots, I think, around selling his product. At the end of the fair, I don't know how many employees he has. I think he's over 50. I can't remember the number. He took all of the employees who worked that 6 months very hard and took them for a week in Hawaii as a reward for what they did.
Wow.
And,
He was also the first food vendor to gross $1 million.
okay, the first food vendor to gross $1 million.
They deserved it because they were here for 2 years before the fair.
That's right. So it's I love it. I was talking to Mr. Human about his he opened a spot there, and it was yeah, I love hearing the stories of the people who believed enough in this effort to be involved, and then got rewarded. And they worked hard. The Petros people, for example, and others, are just so many great stories.